No, I just said that to you. Now you're on. I haven't got yeah. I think you should. I was just going to come and say that was our instruction. If that's all right, yes, please. I think we've been asked to ask people to go up to the top.
You're going to have to do it.
Yeah, I'll come up in a second. Yeah, I've got the lovely job of the roving mic. Yeah, join you. That's okay, no, don't worry.
Okay.
Get through to you. Oh, you've got it again. There's something about standing up there that makes me feel like I'm going to...
Yes, now you've said it out loud.
Hello. All right. We did sort of, we were allowed to let you sit down the bottom and not. It's the security side. You know, when you're going to go right, it's down, yeah. So
But you don't know, you might suddenly launch ourselves.
So the chair said, oh yeah, we can just sit down there, it's fine. And then we realised that the chief executive coming and said, actually, it's actually, we just stick to the rules.
Yeah, for everyone. It's anyways.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure whether or not he is, and I spoke to security.
Okay, if we can all take our seats, please.
I did watch it.
They went into life.
Well,
I need to go downstairs.
Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome to this edition of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. First of all, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Councillor Tony Dyer and I'm the chair of the OSM. On my right hand side is Lucy Fleming and on my left hand side is Stephen Peacock, the Chief Executive. The other person I'll introduce is Councillor Mark Waxhaw, who's the Vice Chair of OSM. Just in case anything happens and he has to take over for me, which I hope won't be the case. But that brings me on to safety information. Other councillors and officers who are attending will introduce themselves as and when they speak, if they choose to do so. Safety information, we're not expecting a fire alarm. If there is an alarm, then please proceed calmly and safely to the main entrance, turn right, go down to the ramp and meet just outside the west end of the cathedral. Okay, agenda item number 2 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence, Lucy?
We do, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Steve Pearce, who's now replacing Councillor Rippington on the board.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is minutes of previous meeting. I believe they are to follow, Lucy.
That's correct, Chair.
Agenda item number 5 is Chair's business. I do not have any Chair's business today, so we can move directly on to agenda item number 6, public forum. Before we do that, I just want to double check and make sure that all members have read the statements and the questions and the answers to the questions. Also, that members of the public who are asking questions, have you had a chance to read your the responses to your questions? So what I'll do is, as we have a lot to cover, what I'll do, Councillor Townsend?
Chair, are you talking about the stuff that was sent to us today? No, I haven't read it because I don't sit waiting for things to come through on the day. Sorry, public forum, but we only received it today.
Okay, Suzanne. What I'm going to do is, because the majority of members, not every member has seen the responses to your questions, are you happy to go straight to any follow-up questions?
Yeah.
I won't take too long. First, thank you for being able to answer the questions in the time. I know that sort of everything's been a bit tight. So with a Totterdown hat on, there's the issue of rat running that may be going on between Bath Road and Wells Road. I'm struggling a bit. It says the graph shows an increase in traffic, most likely due to non-compliant vehicles from the Totterdown Bridge direction taking the route through to Wells Road. So I think I've got quite a work to know that no monitoring of that is going on. Is there there anything that we can do as a sort of local organisation to get that checked, whether we've got an increase of rat running of non-compliant vehicles through our neighbourhood?
Adam, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so that's covering kind of 2 or 3 of the question points. So the graph is what that's indicating is that there is an alternative route you can take, for example, from the Spine Road to get to St John's Lane to drive around
So,
the...
Chair, there's no sound apparently.
Okay, bear with us a moment, Adam. Your stentorian voice is broken in the microphone.
Jan, is there a reason why this has come so late?
Because of the delays in the papers being published, we had to give more time for people to be able to put questions in, so that meant that there was less time for officers to be able to respond to the questions. I think, Suzanne, you got quite full responses to the questions, well, most of them. I think Adam was did what some of us politicians probably should do, which was cut down on the waffle on at least one of the answers. But let's see if we can get the microphones working again.
Whoops.
Okay, I've just been asked to test the microphone just to see if I'm being picked up. Okay, we're all good to go. Adam, sorry for interrupting.
No problem. So that was kind of a well-used route anyway, so coming from sort of Totterdown, like the Spine Road, Totterdown Bridge, turning left at 3 Lamps and then turning right onto St John's Lane as a kind of semi-orbital route around the south of the city. It's one that we would expect to see more traffic if people are trying to avoid the clean air zone, which the council would indicate it has seen a bit more traffic. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, like through the Angers Road section, we don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. I think it was probably considered a rat run prior to the CAS becoming an operation, so I don't think there's any kind of disagreement that that issue exists. The question is what to do about that issue. As we illustrate out in the answers in the accompanying paper, there is an allocation of £10 million for local transport schemes that will be determined by the next administration as to how they want to implement that funding. That is a significant increase in funding for local transport schemes enabled through the CAS, and as we said at the time of approving the full business case, we would allocate funding to mitigate the impacts of CAS, so that's the sort of scheme you could apply for to get funding for from that sort of money. But obviously, you know, the next administration will need to be making those decisions.
Okay, that's helpful. So we'll just keep looking out for that then. Thank you. So I don't really want to follow up anymore, but just say sort of well done to everybody really, because it's been quite a journey. And, you know, there are hiccups obviously, but it looks like it's going pretty well. So thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'll also briefly mention that as a stakeholder, you've probably been sent an email regarding something that may be happening in the BS3 area, which may include the opportunity to look at that one. Okay, we have question 5 and 6 from Dan Ackroyd. Dan, do you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, I've got a supplementary for question 5. That's a bit of a long one. The answer given talks about a statutory minimum. I'm aware that under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information England Regulations 2012, a minimum of 28 days is mentioned in relation to key decisions, but there's no regulation regarding forward plans in that legislation. Government guidance about oversight and scrutiny does mention a need for...
Dan, you're reading out a statement. This isn't really a question.
Okay. The answer given doesn't answer the question, I think. I've not received a clear answer of why the Mayor feels this is acceptable to violate that part of the Constitution. I will ask the Mayor to give an answer, but my question to this committee is, if you're unable to perform your overview and scrutiny role due to lack of forward plan, will you use your power under section OSR 15 to require the Mayor to appear before you and explain his actions?
Okay, thanks, Dan. I think what the answer to that question highlighted is that there is a statutory minimum. The objective is to provide a longer overview of decisions that are coming to Cabinet, but the reality of the situation is that's not always possible, and I think that's what was tried to be explained in one of the other responses as well. What I will say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of governance, and I think when we move on to the new form of governance, one of the tests of whether that new governance is working will be whether we are able to put a forward plan in place that looks much further forward. Do you have a follow-up to question number 6?
No.
Okay, thank you, Dan. We now move on to statements. Dan, I'm going to let you go first because Dave Ridgway isn't here yet. So would you like to... Okay, we're just going to... For logistics reasons, David, we're going to let Dan go first.
I have previously spoken at the Committee Model Working Group about my concerns about a successful transfer of power. UK law in general is not well suited for handling situations involving lame duck politicians or politicians who are playing hardball. There is an assumption that different parts of government will work together without needing to get lawyers involved at every step. I would have hoped that the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board are able to compel the Mayor to act in accordance with Bristol's constitution. If you're not able to do your overview and scrutiny role due to lack of cooperation with him, I think you have a duty to make a clear statement about that, rather than just hoping that nothing goes too wrong in the remaining months of this administration.
Thank you, Dan. We'll now move on to statement number 4. Oh, sorry. Bear with me. There's statement number 1 from Dave Wedgwood.
Thank you. My statement really is about the clouds and the money. It's successful in a growth, and it's a public health measure, not a transport measure. And we've reduced the emissions by 9%, which is means we have much clearer air quality in the city centre, but not enough. Never enough when you're dealing with asthma, respiratory illness and early death. So my issue is this. Sonic has money for £26 million. A lot of this is going to highway schemes, and the concern is that that doesn't really reduce the number of cars going into the city centre, and therefore reduce the amount of poor air quality in the city centre. Most CAS schemes are based on putting money into walking, cycling and improving public transport. That has to be done through the West Midlands Mirror Combined Authority, because this is no longer a transport authority, it's only a highway authority by law. So the regional authority is actually whacker. The issue that I have is the concern that us putting some of that money and making sure that we don't use that money as transport levy, it actually is on top of the additional transport levy to maintain some of the bus services to the most poorest parts of Bristol that are left without bus service. Ashton Vale, Albury Court, parts of Stapleton, Broom Hill, Brislington, parts of South Bristol, South Mead, even where Jeff will. They have no public bus services. So I really think that is a top priority, and that's where the money should be going, and that's what the transport groups and the local residents would like to have. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Statement number 3 has been withdrawn, so statement number 4 was going to be by the Aston Vale suffragettes, supported by Bristol Older People's Forum. David, I believe you were going to speak on.
I will speak. I do apologise. I've just left Ian Crawford. We had another meeting with WECA on the Temple Meads area, and David was there as well. But really, it goes back to the point. These people are some of the poorest people in Bristol, some of the oldest people in Bristol, and they have no public bus service. And whether we argue with it, Bristol's going to provide that bus service, already the Mayor for West of England's the correct authority, but Bristol has to passport that money through the Transport Levy and the WECA Act. Again, we are very concerned, they are very concerned that the levy will stay at the same money, but we're using the CAS. The CAS is extra money and needs to go on top of that levy, so some of that money will have to come away from highway schemes. There is an urgent need to put public bus services back in this city. The only city that doesn't have a level of bus services, that city region is Stoke-on-Trent, and that's no reputation to have. So on behalf of those people who have no buses, are isolated, and some of the poorest people in South Bristol chair, we need to sort this. And again, that same applies to people in East Bristol and Brisbane. So I ask you to please look at that and pass that on to the Cabinet. And I know our Cabinet members listening here as well. Thank you. And also back of here, of course.
Thank you, David. That brings us to the end of public forum. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. We now move on to agenda item number 7. Now, to avoid some confusion, agenda item number 7 in the paper is also then as agenda item 12 and agenda item 13. I've been asked because we moved it up because most of the public forum interest was in the 2 reports. So we're going to take this in 2 parts. We're going to do the first part, which is about the evaluation of the clean air zone, and then we're going to do some questions on that. We'll then do the second part. This is about some of the financial outcomes of that, and ask questions about that. And obviously, if there are questions which tie in both, you can also ask questions about that at that time once we've had both reports. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to John Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, my name is John Smith. I'm the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration. Just a couple of things from me. I just want to introduce my colleagues. So Alex Hurd, the Director of Economy Place, immediately to my right, and Adam Crowler, who I think is well known here as the head of the street transport team. I actually joined the council in the autumn of 2021, just around the time when we got the direction to implement the Clean Air Zone, and I was shortly thereafter became the Senior Responsible Officer for the implementation programme. So I just wanted to make that point, Chair. I've held that role ever since, and I'm, from an officer point of view, responsible for the implementation of the scheme. As you said, we're going to do it in 2 parts at your request, and that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Adam to take us through the evaluation report.
Thanks, John. Could we go to page 13 of the pack? Oh, sorry, I meant page 13 of the accounts report, sorry.
Sorry, it's a supplementary.
Is that the one with table A, Adam? Is that what you're looking at?
It's page 6 of the report, but it's page 13 of the CAS back in the agenda.
Sorry, Chair and Chief Exec, I can't read any of this. Would I be allowed to if I promise not to shout and call at anybody? No, it's down there.
Yeah.
Bear with me. reading out my printed copy, Suzanne, and I'll try and ask my questions from memory.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to run through the CAS evaluation report, picking out some of the kind of more salient elements of it. The introduction there covers why we need a clean air zone, how we got to a Class D, and how the CAS works. Hopefully everyone's largely aware of that. Just very quickly, we were directed by government to implement a series of measures that would improve air quality. The modelling and the work that we did indicated that the best and most effective way to do that was to implement a Class D charging zone. Class D charging zone being a zone that charges all non-compliant vehicles to enter it. The amount that's charged is £9 for the smaller vehicles, so cars, vans, etc., £100 for the larger vehicles, so heavy goods vehicles, buses, etc. And there was a large amount of grant funding made available to help residents and businesses upgrade their vehicles as part of the overall package, which was £26 million. And we also did a large number of kind of outreach projects to engage with businesses and residents and help them to amend their ways of travel as well. So if we move on to the next page, looking at improvements in air quality, legal compliance is about getting below 40 micrograms of NO2 per metre cubed in all across the entire city. That is measured across a calendar year, so January through to the end of December. JACU, who are the Joint Air Quality Unit that DEFRA and the DFT jointly own, they did a State 1 assessment on our air quality, which was done in sort of the summertime. So that is based on the first 6 months of evidence from air quality data that is being collected. Their determination from that was that it is worth doing a State 2 assessment. So it's a test to say, is it worth doing a full year's worth of checks to see if you are compliant? They have determined it is worth doing that test. The State 1 assessment doesn't really give any other indication other than that. The data that we have included in the report is the data that we have available to us, which is from January through to November. That's part of the reason for the report coming out quite late for Covenant and Scrutiny, is that data we've only just kind of received that early on in January. That data is what we'll talk about in a second. The next section just shows how we collect and measure air quality data, which I won't go into in detail. If we can move on to the next page, and then we can see the results of the clean air zone, or the changes in air quality following the implementation of the clean air zone, because there are a variety of factors that influence air quality. So looking at the whole city, we're looking at a 9.7% reduction in NO2 concentrations. Within the zone, a 12.6% reduction, and outside of the zone, a 7.8% reduction. So we had a lot of discussions when we were doing the full business case and discussing the implementation of CAS. There was a lot of concern about the scheme pushing pollution into other areas. And the view at the time was, which I think the results are reflecting, is that the point of the CAS is that it improves and cleans up the whole fleet, so the whole fleet of vehicles. So that vehicle that is driving through the clean air zone is also cleaner when it's driving through the clean air zone in it's driving through Church Road, etc. So the reason you see that improvement in air quality across the whole city is that the upgrade of vehicles that the clean air zone drives means those vehicles are cleaner when they're driving around the rest of the city as well. Obviously you see a more significant improvement within the zone. That's the area that's being targeted, and that's the area that the non-compliant vehicles are less likely to go into. Some of the sites with the biggest reductions there: Bedminster Down Road, Hotwell Road, particularly Park Row and Upper Magdalen Street. That was one of the worst polluted parts of the city by the hospitals. I think we could also say that is probably influenced by the street space scheme there that reduced some of the highway capacity, putting in cycle routes, as well as being within the clean air zone. So before the clean air zone was introduced, we had 18 sites where there was exceedances. Since it's been introduced, we now have 6 sites. Now, as I say, this is BCC data. This is not the JACU assessment. So it's the same data that JACU will be using, but they have a number of different ways of assessing the data to determine whether you are compliant or not. And it is not a full year's data yet. So JACU will have that full year of data. So to make the assessment whether we are compliant. Our data shows 6 sites have exceedances. That doesn't necessarily mean we won't be compliant. It's slightly complicated, but we will get the JACU verdict from the State 2 assessment in the summer, around June, we expect, and that will determine whether we were compliant in 2023. Those sites that still have high levels, you've got Colston Avenue, Old Market Roundabout, Parsons Street, College Green, Bedminster Road, and Lewins Mead. Overall, though, we have seen significant reductions in air pollution across the city. I think it's probably also worth, my visual metaphor for air quality is a bit like a circus tent with lots of spikes sticking up, and those spikes are the bits that cause the biggest problem that we're trying to push downwards. And in doing that, you push the whole tent down. So where you see that reduction in air pollution across the city, you're seeing that effect of all those vehicles pushing everything down. So, you know, residential roads that suffer mainly from background pollution levels will have slightly lower background pollution levels. So it does drive air quality improvements across the whole city. If we go on to the next page then, we wanted to look at some of the potential impacts of the Clean Air Zone. All of these I can kind of caveat with a list sort of as long as my arm, to be honest, because there's lots of other things that happen that impact a lot of these issues. So retail footfall rates, for example, are impacted by things like the cost of living crisis. COVID has been a big factor across all of these things that we're going to look at. There are changing patterns in retail and transport that are still going back to a new normal following COVID. But I think the thing we can see from retail footfall rates is there hasn't been a significant change in retail footfall in the city centre areas, which I think you would probably see as a positive, as there was some concerns that the cabs would lead to people not wanting to come into the city centre. What we can also see from the car park usage is that there is a reduction in car park usage at the galleries, which is typically one of the most popular, well-used car parks in the city centre. So that would tend to indicate we've got similar numbers of people in the city centre with less car usage driving that. So one of the expectations from the CAS when we presented the full business case was that some of those trips would move to walking, cycling, bus usage, etc. That would appear to be indicating that. As I say, there's a lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures. If we move on to the next one then, traffic flow, very similar. There's a lot of things that affect traffic flow. One of the areas that there were concerns about diverting traffic would be St John's Lane. Whilst we've been collecting data, we've closed Malago Road inbound to traffic as part of the Bedminster Green Works. That has significant impact in terms of traffic diversion and such like. So there are a lot of things that impact what conclusions you can reach. Looking at the graphs of the data, 2021 is quite hard to use as any evidence because that was right in the middle of the pandemic. We had very different traffic flow levels to what we have now. 2022 is a bit better, so we're generally looking to compare 2022 to 2023. The traffic flow data we have for the whole city shows a very small decrease in traffic across the whole city. All accounts aren't going in the city between 2022 and 2023. One thing you could possibly draw from that is that traffic flows have been increasing steadily since the COVID pandemic. So we saw a reduction in traffic flows, quite a significant reduction during the pandemic. A lot more people working from home, changes to traffic patterns, those have been creeping back up. The fact that we see a very slight reduction, you could interpret that as saying, well, you would expect it to actually be increasing still following the pandemic. So it's largely what was expected. The modelling indicated a sort of a 2% reduction in trips across the city from the CAS, and that's roughly what we're seeing from the traffic flow data that we have. There is some more data on specific sites, which we discussed in the questions. Particular one that you will see in the appendix, Lower Ashley Road, so just to the north of Junction 3, is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. We also talked about St John's Lane earlier, where we've seen, again, additional traffic doing that right turn into St John's Lane, which, you would expect as people trying to avoid the zone. The other graph on St John's Lane is the left turn from St John's Lane into Wells Road. What that shows is no change in traffic. Now that movement forces you to go into the clean air zone, so you would expect non-compliant vehicles to no longer be doing that movement. Again, what we expected was then that some compliant trips would start doing that movement because there'd be some space freed up. The fact that it's a similar traffic volume, again, indicates that you've got that kind of change in traffic flows from non-compliant vehicles moving out of the zone, compliant vehicles moving into the zone. Local links on traffic, on the next page, sir. The local links between traffic levels and air quality. It's important to understand there's a baseline level of pollution that is created by a number of different things. So part of that, and a big part of that, is traffic. But also, if the wind's blowing from a certain direction, you get pollution coming down from Birmingham, for example. There are other causes of pollution. NO2 itself tends to dissipate over about 15 metres. So if you are, for example, on the flyover at Eastgate, it will dissipate fairly clearly and fairly quickly because it's elevated, it's not tracked. If you're on Upper Moorland Street by the hospital, it won't dissipate particularly quickly because there's high-sided buildings, the road is quite narrow. So that impacts those kind of high pressure points that we have, but you end up with this sort of lower level background pollution across the whole city. So the fact that we've seen that kind of 7% reduction in pollution across all the sites indicates that you'll be seeing that reduction in background pollution across the city as well, which is beneficial and obviously a useful output of the CAS. Areas of potential traffic displacement we've covered already. I think the important point to note really is that we haven't seen particularly worsening air pollution in most of those points. There are a couple of points where we've seen worsening air pollution. It hasn't gone above the 40 microgram limit, and I would expect that air pollution will start to improve over the next couple of years as the fleet cleans further. As we mentioned earlier, we have money in the CAS funding to implement local traffic schemes that could mitigate those impacts further if we have appropriate schemes. If we move on to the next page, looking at the impact on journeys. There's a bit of fluctuation there on the first graph, but what you can see largely is that you've got a similar kind of level of journeys into the zone once people have got used to it. The vehicle compliance, I think you can see fairly clearly that there is a increase in compliant vehicles. So this graph is shortened. You haven't got the bottom 75% of it, because that is just blue compliant vehicles. So it's focusing in on the kind of core bit of the data. And what you're seeing is an increase in compliant vehicles from just under 85% to heading up towards 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as we provide funding for people to upgrade their vehicles, and people do that themselves as well. We've seen a fall off in the locally exempt, so we had a number of exemptions in place to assist people with adjusting to the implementation of the Clean Air Zone. Those have gradually been phased out, so those numbers have reduced, and again you'll see a reduction there in the number of non-compliant vehicles, which is, as I say, what we would expect to see. We can skip the next page because that just provides that in actual numbers. Journeys into the CAS by vehicle type. Looking at the graph, there isn't significant changes to that. HGVs, for example, are pretty steady in terms of numbers, which indicates that they're either paying the fee or they're upgrading their vehicles. They still need to make the trips. So the Clean Air Zone, I suppose, was not really intended to significantly reduce specific journeys. It was intended to clean the fleet up and clean those journeys up. Bus usage rates are have been fluctuating a huge amount since COVID. I think we're all aware there was a significant reduction in bus patronage during COVID, and it's been recovering gradually ever since. There have been another number of fairly significant government interventions as well, like the £2 fare cap that's been in place for quite some time and is being extended. It's very difficult then to draw many conclusions about what the Clean Air Zone impact on bus usage was. We know when the Clean Air Zone first came in, there was a significant reduction in the number of bus services available due to a driver shortage. That will have impacted bus usage rates. What we are seeing is a general increase in bus usage rates. It's quite hard to attribute that to the CAS in itself, but we would have expected to have had some impact. Moving on to the next slide then, income generated by the CAS and operating costs. So you can see the payment rates for the CAS daily charge there. And then if we move on to the next slide, so just gradually increasing as people get more used to it. On to the next slide, the PCNs issued. There is another graph in the appendix which is useful as well, which shows PCNs issued by date. There was some delays to issuing PCNs due to the volume and the need to get the system functioning well. What we are seeing is that the number of PCNs being issued is falling steadily and has fallen by about a fifth since we had additional staffing numbers in. So we are seeing more compliance and fewer people paying PCNs. We then have some analysis on the status of PCNs, so about 49% paid, 6% cancelled, 16% written off, and 28% still to be either paid or taken through the other elements of the life cycle, so they may be cancelled, they may be written off, etc. But 49% paid at this point in time. And then just moving on to the next page, the overall financial summary. Total income of the first year of operation. Now, just to note, that is a year rather than a financial year. So within the CAS funding report, it will talk about financial years because obviously the council works in financial years. But in the first year of operation, from November through to November, there's been a total income of 31 million, which nets off to 26 million when you take out the costs of operating the CAS and paying the DFT fees that you have to pay for using their systems and such like. So that's the end of the main body of the report. I think I've covered most of the things I wanted to cover in the appendix, but happy to take any questions and refer to other elements if people have them.
Thank you, Adam. First of all, just before I open it up for questions, we are having technical issues with the microphones. Sound is going out, but it's going out in a way that it's not easy for people to read, but we're going to carry on as best we can, and hopefully something that will be resolved. I think we can hear beavering away in the background as we try to resolve the issue. Okay, normally at this stage I'll open up for questions, and Councillor Smith has already put his hand up, but before I do that, I want to ask a couple of questions myself, based on some comments that were made recently. The Clean Air Zone was described as being a blunt instrument, and the implication was that the administration would have chosen to use this method to tackle air pollution if it wasn't essentially imposed upon them by the government. So I guess my question is, what would have been our plan B to look at tackling air quality if we weren't using a Clean Air Zone? Was there a plan put in place to do something like that?
Yeah, so I would agree it is a blunt tool to achieve what you're trying to achieve. The reason I would say the government has been forced to force authorities into making these changes is that probably there hasn't been enough investment in sustainable transport modes over a number of years that gives you that network. That means you don't have that build-up of congestion and pollutants. So what we did following COVID, we used the Emergency Active Travel Fund to design a number of schemes that significantly reduced traffic volumes in some of the most polluted areas, so particularly Bristol Bridge. We also did the scheme on Upper Moreland Street, Park Row, which took out lanes of traffic and put cycle routes in. We put together a fairly extensive list of measures that we hoped would drive that improvement in air quality without a kind of hammer technique, if you like. When we did the modelling, it showed it was going to achieve what was needed in some places, but not all places. So following on from that, we then developed the CAS-D. Those schemes did enable us to make the scheme smaller, I suppose. So previously we were looking at a much larger zone, particularly for commercial vehicles. By making those changes, we were able to design a smaller scheme that would focus where the actual issue is. If I come back to that metaphor about the circus tent, I would rather see the whole thing pushed down a lot than those single spikes hammered down a bit. Do you see what I mean? So if you've got a lot of money to spend on doing something, improving bus services, improving sustainable transport is going to have a long-term impact, I think is the most appropriate tool to use. There was a problem that had to be resolved very quickly. We had to do something that would resolve that problem. The Clean Air Zone improves air quality a lot, which is really good. You've seen the benefits there. it needs to be done alongside a lot of those other sort of projects. So we did some of them through the Emergency Active Travel Fund. We have got more funding coming in now through CRSTS. There's BSIP money as well that's being spent on buses. There are other ways that we're improving that sustainable transport offer. But I think, that's where the long-term focus needs to be, because the Clean Air Zone, as you see, doesn't really reduce traffic volumes. And traffic has air quality impacts. It has lots of other impacts as well in terms of productivity and health outcomes, etc., from people being less active. So more sustainable approaches, I think, would be the favoured approach, but we had to do something quickly to resolve the high issues that we had. And there are other things like PM 2.5 that need consideration as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask about PM 2.5 because obviously this Clean Air Zone is focused on NO2 rather than PM 2.5. But obviously cars are not on the only influence on PM 2.5. We've got solid burning wood stoves as well as a big issue. However, the question I'm going to ask instead is, you mentioned about the linkage with JACU. So if my understanding is correct, it would be JACU who decide whether we reach legal compliance?
Yeah, so JACU will do the formal assessment, which is their State 2 assessment. That will determine whether we are legally compliant. You have data points that will show things. JACU have a specific approach to assessing those data points and giving them weightings to determine whether you're compliant or not. So we presented our data points. JACU will do further work on those to determine whether we are compliant or not. You then have a State 3 assessment, which if you are compliant in State 2, and you get a State 3 assessment that says, have you maintained compliance? And then the State 4 assessment is effectively saying, yes, it's maintained and it's likely to stay long term.
Okay, I'll ask one final question because otherwise I'm guilty of doing what I always tell members not to do, which is ask too many questions in one go. So my final question is, you mentioned about the idea of the circus tents with different peaks. So is legal compliance when we got the average moved down below the legal level, or is it when every single peak is below that level?
Is when every peak is below that level. So if I take an example, Bristol Bridge, where it's closed to general traffic, that hugely reduces the volume of traffic in the centre of the city and therefore air pollution in the centre of the city, where there's a huge number of people spending a lot of time. So that has a massive impact on people's health. Does it get all those spikes below that point? No, but that kind of the blanket bit goes a lot lower in that area where there's a lot of people. So that's why, again, it's a bit of a blunt tool, that it's focusing on those spikes rather than the overall level so much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a list of questions, but I'll start with the first one and then maybe we'll share them out. My first one, actually, before we get into the content, is about the timing of this report. I think, Chair, your response to Dan's public forum question was characteristically polite, and I'd expect no less. But I'm a little bit sceptical about this, the idea that it couldn't be published any earlier than it was, because this came out with the Cabinet Papers, or after the Cabinet Papers, about 6:30ish on Tuesday evening, at which point Points West was broadcasting a report that they'd clearly spent all day, if not longer, making. So they'd obviously had this report at the latest on Tuesday morning. A decision clearly was made. It could have been published at that point to the rest of us. It wasn't. It went to the media while it was being held back from scrutiny by councillors and by the public. So I'd like to know who made that decision and why anyone thought that was acceptable.
Well, I'm actually going to respond to that because I know that decision was not made by officers. That's
I wasn't suggesting that it was.
decision. And maybe it's a question that's more appropriate for Cabinet, where the person who does make that decision is there.
The Cabinet members in the room.
As far as I know, the media had some details from it, but I don't think they were sent the whole report. I mean, I'd had some basic sort of headline details of what the report was going to say, but I hadn't seen the full report until very, very recently, actually, because I think it was genuinely being written.
John? Yeah, I'm happy to talk to what I know, Councillor. So certainly the report did come together quite late. There was a lot of information to be pulled together, and the report that Adam's just taken me through took quite a lot of formatting to get it in that presentational style. So the content might have been available earlier. I think quite a lot of the late working was getting it into that format. So I'm afraid that's all. But all I can do is apologise because it didn't meet the statutory time frame, so, and it should have done so. Apologies.
Steve, do you have a further question?
I've got several. I don't know if you want me to carry on or let others have a go and I'll come back.
Well, I'll allow you, as I took 3, you can have 2 more and then we'll move
All
on.
right. Thank you very much. Right, what's my next one then? So, yeah, Adam, when you talked about traffic flow and footfall and other things, you quite rightly caveated that, saying there's lots of other factors and it's not necessarily down to CAS. But the assumption seems to be here that all the changes in air quality are down to CAS. And it's very difficult to test that without seeing the longer term trends. So I went on the air quality website and I'm sure it used to be easier. I don't know if the website's changed. I used to be able to find that data and now I couldn't. I don't know if that's me doing it wrong, but as I understand it from the few data points I could find, air quality was already improving broadly before CAS. And all we've got here is the 12 months before and then the 12 months after to compare. Is that longer term trend data available? Is there somewhere we can find that? Because I tried and I couldn't.
Yeah, it should all be available. I don't manage that bit of the website, but it's all open data. Air quality will have been improving slowly because engines gradually are getting cleaner, and air quality will continue to improve as engines get cleaner. The CAS was about accelerating that process.
So I guess this is question number 3 then, as a follow-up. What I'm trying to get at is how much has CAS accelerated that progress? How much of that 9% that we've got across the board would we have got anyway? And it's very difficult, I don't think to give you a figure now, but has any work been done to try and understand that? Or are we assuming that all of the 9% is because of CAS?
So probably the best way to explain that would be the baseline model. Given that we have largely seen the results of the modelling expected, the baseline model indicated if we didn't do the CAS, it'd be more like 2027, 2028 before we were compliant. So it has brought forward compliance, depending on when we get compliance, by kind of 3, 4, 5 years, depending on when we're actually compliant. I couldn't say the exact percentage allocated, but that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I don't know who it might be, but if anyone can explain to me, not right now, but another time, how to find that data, I'd really appreciate it, because I tried and failed.
Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Tony. A couple of comments first. The first that Steve mentioned about the report, it is actually pretty galling on information we've been asking for a very long time, to turn on the local news and find it being reported when I didn't even know I had access to it. And that, and it's definitely not a criticism of officers, but is not the way we should be running open government. I'm not saying we should be at least sharing with councillors what we're sharing with media on information that is so critical, particularly as actually there's a lot of very valid information, and I can say that as someone who challenged the process when it was being put forward, and I see that there is a lot of useful information there. But that doesn't stop me from also having some further questions and comments, because Adam, when it was delayed, you were telling us that the direction of travel was already improving because the threat of it had brought about vehicle change. So we'll never know what was brought about by the threat of the clean air zone that hadn't been brought in versus what is actually a result of the zone. But where my questions lay, firstly, let's take one of the indicators from Blackboy Hill showing a massive increase. Now, from what I understand, that site is being monitored all year. So why did no one identify that there was an irregularity on that site earlier in the year and look at some alternative action that could have been taken? I don't understand why it's only discovered at this stage of the process.
Yeah, so there was an issue that basically a kebab shop opened up and was just sending lots of fumes to where the detector was. I don't know exactly when detectors are checked, but they're not checked. They're not continue reporting. It's a tube that sits there and just has air going into it, which registers the quality of the air. So then they go and get collected at various times, and you see what the change has been over a year. So it's not like a continual monitor like you've got. So there's one on the city centre that's a continual monitor, and if that went haywire, you'd know straight away. You only know it when you go and collect the tube and assess the data.
Okay. Not as part of my questions now, but when we were looking at this in the initiation stage, I raised parochial questions from my ward on the issue of the air quality at the Southmead Road, Henleys Road junction, and there were some measurements being taken there. They don't seem to feature, so I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that, if that was possible. Now, I then wanted to comment, Tony, on the rest of the report. Huge amount of information, but I'm not going to apologise for being an accountant. But when I look at the figures, I want to try and work out what is coming in from the daily charges and what is coming in from the PCNs. I have no means of working that out. I have no means of working out what is due at the end date of this report from both charges going through the zone and PCNs, and no idea of what the bad debt provision is, which, given the number of tickets that have been cancelled or written off for one reason or another, is a very high proportion of the amount outstanding. So I've no idea of that. I've no idea of how any of those figures appeared in the authorities' accounts for March 23 and how they're going to appear for March 24. I don't know whether the unallocated sum is going to appear as a reserve, as a creditor, whether it's taken into the general fund. No explanation of that, and I think that is actually very important. Not time now to go into questions about the uncollected sums, but it's actually a massive proportion. I'd like separately from this to know how that compares with other zones, and are we performing better than others? Are we performing worse than others, and why? So there seems to be, it's fantastic, and Adam sadly knows this, that the more information he gives us, the more difficult the questions I'll then ask. So I don't apologise for that either, because I think that's fundamental understanding, because even if we have something that some of us didn't agree with in the first place, we at least want to maximise the income we're getting from it so that it's available for appropriate use.
Okay. John? Sorry, I'm not sure there was a question, Jeff, but there's some very, very valid points. So can I just make a couple of comments? Obviously, we are still in the relatively early stages, and it has been quite a complicated process just to follow the flows of the money through. Notwithstanding, obviously, there was the initial period where there was a soft enforcement, and then you're into the PCNs and in the appeal elements coming through, and separating those out has been quite complicated. You know, to be very open, in the early days of the enforcement in particular, and both in terms of the cameras, but also the processes behind it, we did have some teething problems. So there is a sense of that all being ironed out and then getting a more comprehensive picture, which is only really just starting to emerge, if I'm honest. But yeah, I can't answer the points about the financial in detail, but I know we've got a session on GNR Scrutiny, which we can look at that perhaps in more detail in terms of the finance elements. But yeah, all I would say, it has been quite complicated to follow the money through.
Adam, sorry, Adam was going to respond as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there is in one of the appendices which looks at the statistical data on page 41 of the CAS valuation report. It shows a graph of the revenue from PCNs and the CAS charge rate. So the CAS charge rate generating from kind of just under $1 million a month to just around about $1 million a month, and as you move through the year. The PCN is a bit more fluctuating because we have this big pile up of PCNs that couldn't be processed that we then had to get through, and there's the whole process of appeals that takes quite a long time. So it's quite difficult to estimate how much you will actually continue to generate from that, and there is some work being done to do that assessment at the moment. I'm not an accountant either, so I won't say how it's going to be shown in the accounts, but I'm sure other people in the finance team will resolve that.
I think, Chair, that perhaps the point is that between resources and growth and regen scrutiny, we need to work out how this is looked at. I certainly want to duplicate things by asking them here, but given that we, on resources, we have looked very much at collection rates and provision rates and those issues. Somewhere, one of either Osm Resources or Growth and Regen needs to be looking at that and understanding the processes and how it's communicated to the public as well, without giving away trade secrets of how you operate some of the processes. But I just think we need to make sure we get that bit right.
I take that point off who I'm also conscious of what resources we have at present in scrutiny, but so it may be some time before we can do that. Christine, I'm conscious that you have to leave at 5. Do you want to ask any questions?
Yeah, I just got to follow up from what Councillor Gollop has asked about with those that are written off. What is the status of the car if the DVLA doesn't apparently know who the owner is? And what happens to, you understand that a car can be traced, but you've got the registration number. Where does that information go? Because what that says to us is that everybody's at risk because people are driving unlawfully or illegally across our city.
So there's a mixture of things in there, Councillor. So I mean, I referred to this before, but certainly in the early days, the cameras weren't working as well as they should have done, so that was part of it. Subsequently, there are particular licence plates that, for example, you know, we had one which was in the media that had a particular dot in place, which meant it just couldn't register it, or if it did, it registered as the wrong type. So there are a number that, for whatever reason, the system can't seem to capture. It's a relatively low percentage. So undoubtedly there will be other things of more concern. There are foreign licence plates as well, which it struggles with. But undoubtedly there will be issues of concern in there, but it is quite hard to isolate that from the ones which is just struggling to read.
Right, so is there any intention to do any further work around this? Because you haven't denied that there are cars that are driving across our city that may well be illegal or unlawful, but what you're saying to me is that you don't do anything with that. Have you got a breakdown of how many are foreign number plates, for example? Have you got a breakdown as to how many of the over 92,000 days of charge that haven't been paid that you've written off may well have been in those first months when the cameras weren't working? Is a lot. In my view, it's a lot that you've written off. And what I'm concerned about mainly is that this is a public meeting. Those statistics are in the public, and they go, oh, you've collected 49%. I don't need to bother paying because you'll just write it off. In which case, it defeats the object of having it in the first place.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly not the case that we won't follow things up. It's fair to say that the enforcement was initially, we had a soft enforcement period. We have also had some cases, some of which have been well publicised, where for whatever reason the driver wasn't aware and took some time to find out. So there's certainly been a case of us using discretion in cases to look at it. And we also have had some cases where, as I said, the cameras weren't working as well as they should have done initially, and our systems and processes needed some improvement. I'm confident we have them now, so they're working well, and so are the processes. So I think you'll see those figures improve significantly, and we will, if people are deliberately and knowingly not complying with the system, then we will enforce against them, and we have the ability to take enforcement action against them.
Enforcement action in this council is not good across the board. Over 2 million on parking tickets was just written off in the last accounts. I don't have the confidence that the enforcement is there. That's the problem. You've got 49% of people that have paid up. Less than 50% is not. I mean, I appreciate the first few months, whatever. Maybe what I'm asking for is a comparison. So if you break down the stats, rather than giving us for the entire year, you break down those stats and say, this is the first 3 months, here's your percentages, this is the next 3 months, here's your percentages, so that because I would have expected to see an improvement across a 12-month period, if those are the reasons why you're writing them off.
No, that's fair enough. We can show that improvement trend, Councillor, I'm sure. The other thing, say in that table where you're referring to the 49%, there is a significant percentage that are in train, so those are the ones that are in the system at the moment. So it may be that they've just happened, or it may be that they're through the appeals process, which, as Adam said, does take quite some time. So that should be considered as part of that. But it would be, we're happy to look at getting you some more detail about what number of those are successfully charged and recovered, and how that's improved over time. We can do that.
Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. To follow on from Councillor Townsend's questions, it would be good to see some comparisons to see how well we are doing, say, in comparison with London's ULEZ and how many PCNs they are processing and getting money back from. It would be good to have some benchmarking on that, please. Secondly, I would like to talk about traffic displacement and how we're actually monitoring this. So, I live in Lockleys. I'm noticing a lot more traffic on Glenfern Road, Eastgate Road, James Street, where people are actively avoiding the clean air zone because they're scared of it and they don't realise about their vehicle, whether it is compliant or not compliant. And we're seeing a lot more traffic on those roads. Are you intending to do any pollution testing and also traffic counts on those roads that are being used as rat runs to avoid the clean air zone? Please.
So we're not doing additional traffic counts at present. There are actually some traffic counts going on in that area for looking at the minor road work that's ongoing. In terms of pollution monitoring, we have our pollution monitoring sites. If there are areas that you have specific concerns about, we can pass that to the pollution monitoring team, see if they would be happy to put a pollution monitoring device in that location. The Lower Ashley Road results show what we were expecting. I live in that area as well. I've seen the same thing, that there is more traffic using that route to avoid going into the zone on the M32, which is what the modelling expected, what was expected from the scheme. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. It's fairly evident. The question, I suppose, is what can be done about it, or what is proposed to be done about it. I wouldn't expect that the air quality is in exceedance, but it will have got, whether it's got worse or not, I don't know. I'd have to check the specific data locations around that area.
Are you going to be looking at any other areas, such as the Wells Road areas that have been brought up in previously?
So I think the expectation always was that it would take some time to understand where the impacts were being felt, and then we would look to make changes to those areas. So that's why we've allocated the funding. £10 million is in part to mitigate any particular impacts. We're well aware that there's lots of local traffic issues that people have across the city. Some of those will have been exacerbated or created by the cars, and some of those already exist. Weighing up which are the most important to deal with, that will be a process for the committee system to decide how they want to do that, I guess.
Can I have one more question, Chair?
One quick one.
I'm not sure it's a quick one, but I'll go through it anyway. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I'm just wondering if you would have actually preferred to go down the London route of how you actually register for the ULEZ roads, ULEZ charge. So you register your vehicle for entering the ULEZ, and then you just get paid by direct debit if you enter it. Do you think that's an easier system to implement than the one you've got at the moment, where you actually have users have to register their journeys online for each individual journey?
I don't know particularly the specifics of the details of the differences between the systems. That sounds like an easier option. We have the system that we have. I don't know how feasible it would be to change it at this point, but we can certainly ask that question. Okay, so the option wasn't open to us at the time.
Sorry, did you hear that?
The option wasn't open to us at the time to do that.
you. I think it's pointing out some of the conditions about what were introduced were set by Jackie, I believe. So not every option was available. I'm going to move on to Councillor Fodor, and then Councillor Bradshaw, then Councillor Brown, and then back to Councillor Smith.
Right, thanks Chair, and thanks for the information discussion so far. I share the frustration that this has barely been available to study. And one thing I'd like to do is sort of comment that it's been really valuable that some individuals around the city have taken the trouble to pour through different aspects of this and highlight some of the things that have been revealed, because they were able to read it sooner than I was potentially, and they've highlighted some of the more interesting things about what's gone up rather than what's gone down and where. And I think we need to have much further study of that, and I wish there was a proper sort of member briefing to allow some of those areas to be explored and prioritised and then debated. I was going to ask a question about what I do think is the ridiculous sort of the painful way of the charging model that has been used, because a lot of the frustration, a lot of the grief has been because people discover a penalty charge notice before they realise they'd accidentally entered the zone. If local residents could have had an account, then a lot of them would have had an account, would have happily paid each time they deliberately or inadvertently entered the zone, because they would have been willing to pay £9. But if they didn't pay £80 or sometimes double that because of not dealing with it or not realising it had arrived in time, they're pretty angry. And I think that's unnecessary grief that's been caused. So if we weren't allowed to do it, I think the authority needs to push back and say such things are really important lessons that need to be made available in future for any charging schemes that we do have. Because local residents could register. Some of the myths and messaging is one of the things I was going to try and highlight, because there are still myths around about the scheme. Are we trying to improve and target the messaging for the people who don't seem to understand the scheme, or are spreading sort of inaccurate information? Because I'd like to know that we're helping to make it as easy and as smooth as possible for residents and users and local businesses who think they're in a congestion zone or a ULEZ or something which doesn't exist in this city, for instance, or think that all their residents will be charged for coming to this centre, not the shrinking percentage that actually don't comply. So the first question really is that information being pushed out actively? Because it would help make things work better in the city.
Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, just to return to this point, there was not an option was not offered to us for people to register their credit cards and to pay each time, because I did have several emails about that. This isn't a ULEZ scheme, and it isn't a congestion charge. Also, the point of this scheme is that we would like people not to drive polluting cars into the area. So it's rather surprising Green Party councillors suggest that we should offer the facility for people to just have it removed from the money removed from their bank account.
Councillor Alexander, Councillor Martin Fodor asked you a question as an individual councillor, not on behalf of the Green Party. Please respond as the Cabinet member. I'm not really interested in party politics in scrutiny.
Okay, we'll leave that aside. Then I'm surprised that any councillor who is concerned about the levels of pollution in the city would want a facility whereby people could go regularly because they've got large amounts of money in their bank account and just pay to go backwards and forwards through it. We don't want polluting cars in the city because people are dying from that pollution.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question?
Can
we please avoid getting into party disputes?
Of course, yeah, this wasn't a pilot point. Some of us have been calling for clean air for a very long time. But making a scheme that's painful for those where it doesn't need to be seemed unhelpful. On the boundary issues, so again, at the very earliest stage of this scheme being imposed on the city, I raised the question of the impacts on the boundary. My question about that is that we've been told there will be funds for local transport schemes that can alleviate some of the impacts around the boundary and caused by journeys that have now changed. When are those going to happen? How are they going to be implemented? And will they actually happen when they're needed, like before the scheme reaches?
Martin, sorry, just to interrupt me on, because we have still got another section which is about the finances and how the finances will be spent. So this seems to be more a question for that section.
Well, this is about helping to tackle the boundary issues, which are impacts that are reflected in the monitoring. But I'm happy to park that for the moment. The other issue is the problems at some of the contentious junctions, where it's been revealed that there are particular sites on entry or exit of the scheme where particular numbers of penalty charges, charges are being levied. So there are clearly some complicated or kind of difficult locations. Is there big work being targeted on those locations?
Okay, that sounds like a question that might be available to be answered.
Not specifically at this stage. You know, we're aware of those numbers. Obviously, you know, we have a lot of schemes going on. We have those discussions with the area committees about where they feel their issues are.
You're saying there will be discussions with area committees about this?
Well, it'll be for
area committees.
It'll be for area committees to raise those concerns and propose schemes as per the area committee process.
Okay. So I'm conscious that some committees have waited 4 or 5 years for small local transport schemes.
Yeah,
will
Martin,
this
I think
resource
that's
be
going to be
available when it's needed? Because stage 4 is mentioned as kind of the removal of the scheme itself. At that point, there might be new problems encountered rather than dealing with these existing problems at sort of boundaries and junctions. I
think that particular issue about local transport issues is addressed in the second part, but John, do you want to respond?
Okay. I'm in your hands, Chair. Certainly there's something I'd like to say about that, but we can leave it to the next part.
Yeah, because I think there's actually one of the slides refers to it.
Okay.
I'm going to move on to Councillor Bristol.
Thank you, Chair. I think where air quality has improved, we should welcome it. You know, I was looking through the list of the testing points, the assessment points, and I see Parson Street, the air quality around Parson Street, which part of it's in my ward, it all used to be in my ward, had notorious legacy problems with poor air quality, the school nearby, and I see, you know, quite a few locations near schools where the air quality is improved. So I think we should welcome that. I share the Chair's concern about PM 2.5 and PM 10. And I wondered if there was any modelling that could be done alongside the reduction in NOx. And obviously this is a public health measure aimed at NOx, but I wondered if there's any correlation that could be plotted alongside the reduction in NOx in terms of the impact on particulates. Presumably if we are deterring more polluting vehicles, then that must have an impact on particulate levels as well. I wanted to ask about navigation. I see some government announcements about the granularity of information on sat-nav and mapping, and I wondered if that could be brought in to kind of help people work out where the CAS kind of intersection points were and how to sort of complete their journey. The other point is a funding point, which I'll leave. I wondered if there was any assessment of the pace of change in the commercial fleets in the city. It's quite clearly vans and trucks were an important target, particularly those older fleets, including our own within the council, and I wondered if there was any assessment on that front. The last point echoes back to the public forum about the need for a connected public transport network, and you know, we've got to offer people alternatives to travel, particularly those single car journeys, those short journeys. So, you know, a point to the Public Transport Authority, WECA, to put our public transport network back again. I'll leave the other point about finance until later, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bradshaw. Adam?
Yeah, I'll try and remember. I might have to ask them. If I take the last one first, yes, improving public transport is key to making things like this work. It's very disappointing when our services were cut just as the CAS was implemented. We have the BASIC funding, which is seeking to improve people's access to public transport, reducing costs. That's a benefit. We have a big capital programme of works. Those sort of schemes do take a long time, though. So then the other point is what you can just...
Yeah. So there was one on the pace of change in the commercial fleet, and I put our own fleet into that category as well.
Yeah, I don't have data on the pace of change of the commercial fleet. I can ask if we have that. We are looking at our fleet as to what we can do with our fleet, and there is still funding available from the grants that we had from government to upgrade vehicles, and we're also going to look at whether we can make it easier for that to be accessed so that we can continue that change.
And then one of the other points was on the particulate front in terms of mapping, so the impact and the reduction of NOx.
So there probably will be a much smaller improvement in PM, because PM is generated by a number of things like brakes, tyres, as much as it is the fuel emissions and wood burning, that sort of thing. It will be really hard to say whether the CAS has had a particular benefit on particular matter pollution. I would expect there's a lot more sources of it. The CAS doesn't really lead to a significant reduction in vehicle journeys. I'd say a lot of particulates come from the brakes and the road wear and the wheels and stuff. So it's unlikely there's been significant improvements, but we can ask the air quality team as to whether they have a view.
And then the final point was about navigation, particularly the announcements around sat-nav and wayfinding.
Yeah, we do work with sat-nav companies a lot. They're a bit of a law to themselves. We make requests of them, whether they accept them and take them on board. A lot of it is automated. So we do have those discussions, but we're not always successful with getting to do what we like them to do.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a point and two questions. The first point is there's an awful lot of data in here, which is, in one way, really helpful, but in another way, it's a little bit bewildering, and some of the, to me, in terms of the way I interpret data and the way it's presented. For example, the table with the data for each of the monitoring points is really difficult to read because it's there's no sort of form of colour coding or indication as to where or sorting by by the levels of pollution or the levels of improvement or whatever. So that's the first thing. Maybe a heat map or something could have helped us identify where the continuing problems are. And the other point is related to what Councillor Gollop said in the presentation of the financial data, which is part of this report, but also probably coming on relevant to the following report as well, in terms of breaking it down into fiscal years, potentially with my audit hat on, make it more understandable of what's been raised in a particular fiscal year, what's forecast to be raised in following years. Anyway, that's beside the point. Well, it's not beside the point, but that's my little rant. The questions I had, Councillor Gollop asked about Black Boy Hill, and you sort of explained the issue there. Can you explain what the issue is with the galleries monitoring point? I know the footnote suggests that further investigation is needed, but obviously you're aware that something is an issue with the galleries monitoring point. And it also says that more details will be included in the BCC 2024 ASR. What is that?
So I don't know what's caused the galleries one. We would expect to see a significant decrease because there's a lot less traffic there now. Since Bristol Bridge went in, it's reduced the traffic flows through there, so it does appear to be an anomalous result, and the air quality team are looking into why that is. The ASR, I'd have to check with the air quality team. I don't know the detail of what that is.
Okay, so the trouble with the galleries data is basically it's not showing what you expect it to show, and
it seems very wrong, like the Black Boy Hill one. I would say as well, we do have some maps that I can send you showing that data, so that might be easier for you.
That would be useful. The other question I had was regarding the penalty notices issued, and there's the data about the numbers issued at each of the access points into the zone. and some of those are significantly high. Now, it looks like the ones that are significantly high are also the busiest routes into the city. I guess my question is, are those figures proportionately in line with what you would expect, or is there potentially issues with signage in the lead up to some of those access points?
Yeah, so they are generally higher where the traffic flows are higher. I think you'll also find they're a bit higher where you would expect out of town people to be coming through, like around the M32 Clumber Basin, but those are the busiest roads as well, so there is that correlation. We have responded to people's requests about signage, to improve signage. We've put up VMS or variable message signs, made various changes along those lines. It has been a bit of a struggle getting the level of signage we like on the M32, because we've had to work with National Highways on that front, but we do have a good signage there. So where those issues have been raised with us, we have responded and improved signage in those areas, but I think in general what you'll see is that the busiest roads have the most infringements.
So you're confident that the signage situation as it is now is obviously meets criteria and is adequate for the job?
Yeah, with the caveat that you speak to drivers, well, I didn't see that sign. It's like, well, you've got a driving licence, you're supposed to look at all the signage. It's difficult, there's a lot of signs that people have to see, which is why those from out of town might be more susceptible to driving into a zone who haven't seen as much of the press about the clean air zone being in place and therefore being more aware of it.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. We're going to finish off with you, Councillor Smith, and then we'll move on to the financial presentation.
Right, thank you. I'll just pick one then. Picking up on the issues that Councillor Townsend raised about unpaid or dropped PCNs. There's been a case that's had quite a lot of publicity, a gentleman in Salford who's challenged quite a large number of these because he believes that they're unlawful, there's issues with the wording or whatever it might be. And in his words, quoting the news article, he says, "I've won them by default because the moment the City Council sees the arguments, they withdraw." So, can you give us an assurance that as far as anyone can possibly know, the PCNs we're issuing are lawful? And if they are, why aren't we challenging these cases instead of just dropping them?
Yeah, certainly. So I am aware of the case. As you can imagine, we've been following it quite closely. There were some items that we spotted that were a challenge. There were some items that individual spotted which we haven't, which were a challenge, which we have now resolved, and they are, I don't know if you've seen the latest communication from him, but he's basically said he's given up and all the issues have now been resolved. So Councillor, there were initially, so there was a reference to the wrong piece of legislation in one of the notices. So that has now been corrected. We got legal advice that said it wouldn't make a difference in enforcement, but as I said, we have overall taken an approach of trying to be sympathetic, and where people are, have had issues or have flagged things, so we haven't pursued them. We're through those sort of stages now, so we will be, if anyone raises or questions any of the terminology, then we will pursue them. There's no question of that.
Okay, so how many PCNs have we issued and collected on where those issues did exist that are potentially unlawful? And is there a risk that a chunk of that, however many £1 million it is so far, is at risk it could be challenged and reclaimed?
I can't give you a number, but we have had advice that no, there isn't a risk of that.
Thank you, councillors. John, if you'd like to... Adam, you're going to... Okay, Adam, before you go, you mentioned about some maps. Can you send them to Lucy, and then Lucy can distribute them? Thank you. John, over to you.
Would you like us to move on to the financial bit? So I think Alex is just going to take us through the presentation which he prepared, which he has circulated, but only very late in the day. But it's a very short presentation, which we're just going to take you through.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to Alex. I believe this is your first appearance at OSM.
It is, thank you. So yeah, my name is Alex Hearn. I'm the Director of Economy of Place. I've got a short deck, slide deck to take you through today, which is effectively a summary of what is in the paper tabled for January's Cabinet meeting. So if we move on, please. So this slide is to describe the process upon which we arrived at tabling a proposal for the use of the net proceeds. So we start with the primary legislation, which is the Transport Act, which is effectively the basis upon which the government was able to ask us to introduce a clean air zone, and we produced, following the full business case, an order in 2022 which contains a lot of information in it. Obviously you'd expect a lot of legal definitions, how the mechanics of the system work, eligibility, that sort of information. It also includes what is described as a 10-year plan and a 5-year plan, and that we are required to apply the net proceeds in accordance with that part of the order. Now, that part of the order also relates to local transport policies, and in the west of England, and of course within Bristol, local transport policies are contained within the joint local transport plan. So we have therefore taken what's directed within the order, what is a set of objectives and policies within the transport plan to arrive at a detailed programme to apply the net proceeds, and that is what is tabled at Cabinet on the 23rd. If we move on to the next slide, please. So, in the previous item, we discussed the difference between the clean air zone year and the financial year. And within the first financial year, so from November 22 to the end of March 23, £7 million worth of net proceeds were collected. It's on that basis, and of course there's been the figure that in its first full year it's been £26 million, that we're able to forecast net proceeds over time. And obviously that there's a relationship between that forecast and the expectation of compliance generally within the zone, because we see and we anticipate that there will be fewer non-compliant vehicles entering the zone. Now, on that basis, and assuming when compliance will be achieved, it is estimated that a total of £81 million worth of net proceeds can expect to be collected through the clean air zone. Now, the clean air zone, as we've discussed, will cease to exist at some point, and there's an assumption about that in terms of when compliance will be both achieved and then confirmed. But proceeds can continue to be invested, so the collected proceeds can continue to be invested after that. So we effectively were able to invest that for a longer period of time if we wish to. So, and the final point to make is that we have modelled the forecast net proceeds, but we've also been working with our strategic partner for finance to verify our model and the assumptions that go into that, and they have confirmed to us that our assumptions are sound and reasonable. So if we move on to the next slide, please, which is the last slide of the presentation. So this summarises a key part of the Cabinet report. So effectively, having considered the content of the order and the joint local transport plan, what is proposed is 4 thematic areas. So improving public transport, and that involves use of the net proceeds to meet the cost of the transport levy contribution. But it also enables us to increase that contribution, particularly for supported services when contracts allow, and that's anticipated to be in 2025, so there's additional funding going in there. We had always intended that net proceeds would be able to contribute to our match funding envelope for City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement. So there's £10 million identified for that. There will be some other sources of match funding for CRSTS, so that would include our share of EDF, Economic Development Fund, and there's some Section 106, but 10 million from CAS is proposed here. It's worth noting that that would unlock a substantial amount of investment, capital investment in the city for bus, walking and cycling priority measures, and we have a big programme of work between our transport team that Adam leads and our colleagues at the Combined Authority for delivering that. We also include a theme around improving and maintaining infrastructure. Buses, walking and cycling happens on a highway network, which, if not maintained and improved, will depreciate over time, which can discourage use of that form of mobility, and therefore it's important that we can continue to ensure that we have a network and improve a network that can encourage alternative forms of travel as well. So that is a theme, and includes an additional £3.5 million from 2024, so the next financial year through to 2028. And then finally, we include a theme around local and neighbourhood transport schemes, so £10 million of new funding for schemes that can be developed, including through the area committee system. It will be for the area committees to work this out under the next governance model for the council, but this can include, we anticipate this including proposals that could be sponsored from local communities, as was discussed earlier in relation to public forum questions. That also has the opportunity to dovetail with the use of community infrastructure levy receipts, and I know there's been some frustrations about our ability to deliver that, so I'm very conscious of that. So we're hopeful that the two of those together can increase the impact of area committee decision making within the new model. So that's the presentation. The Cabinet report is already published. Happy to try to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Before I go to questions, I'm going to go to Councillors Fodor and Bradshaw first, because they have questions in the first round, which were probably more suited for this area. I'm just going to ask one quick question, which I think Councillor Alexander has already been working on as well, and you touched upon it with transport-related schemes that are funded by local seal. There is a large amount of frustration because there are schemes going back a long time that have not been funded. And all of us who are councillors, I think, in this room have raised concerns about that. Just before Christmas, all councillors were sent a list of some 55 transport-related local seal schemes, and there was concerns about whether they would ever be, when they would be able to get even scheduled for delivery. So can I take it that some of this funding, and Don, you may want to answer this, can be used towards bringing those schemes forward.
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that one. Yes, so first of all, you're right, there has been some challenges around the delivery of that, Councillor Fodor, that is acknowledged. Apologies for that. This is very much something that Councillor Alexander has been pushing with us for some time to address, and this allocation of a significant amount of funding is about bringing forward new schemes, but it is also about bringing forward the means to deliver more effectively on the current schemes going forward. So that is very much part of the plan, Councillor. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Because I think all of us can find it difficult to convince residents to support additional schemes when current ones are not being delivered. I'm now going to open up to the other members of OSM, so Councillor Fodor, and then Councillor Bradshaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, if there is funding for local transport schemes, and if some of it is going to be targeted at places impacted by this clean air zone, which is funding some of this additional budget, it would be really helpful to know how and when it will be shared out, because there are definitely boundary effects. When this was first consulted, so that's going back three years or more, I remember asking if the boundary impacts would be monitored, and I was simply told it won't make the roads around the edge illegal. Not that there wouldn't be effects, but it just wouldn't make them illegal. So there are effects, we know it, but we have been putting people off. We've been pointing out we have no area still funding up to now. So if there's an allocation, how will it be apportioned, and when will it be accessed? And how will it be delivered in terms of actual putting schemes in place? Because as I said, if we get to stage 4 that's mentioned in the earlier report, and the scheme, the zone is taken away, but we've still never delivered anything that will deal with all the extra.
So we give somebody the opportunity to answer that question.
Yeah.
Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as we know, over the last, and I have one local sill scheme in my ward that's been 7 years in the delivery, and others have as well, I know. So we've all been affected by it. The transport team has, over the last 10 years, suffered really massive cuts to its income, which very, very largely comes from central government. We also had 30% inflation in construction costs last year. It's been a very, very difficult environment. But that's it's the reasoning behind it. But I asked for officers to send out an email in October to all councillors saying we are sorry for what has gone on. It isn't acceptable. We have a plan now to turn this round. Second email went out to all councillors in December, basically saying here's the list of the schemes which we have agreed to, or which you voted for in the past. We respect the fact that those decisions have been made. We will honour that. Where inflation has, in every case, caused the amount to increase, we will not ask for you to make another decision. We will find that from our central funding. We will deliver them, and here is a list of the officers responsible for each of the schemes. So we are now working through, excuse me, I mean, you understand that transport isn't like a shopping trip. It is about a mechanism of delivery, which is a number of officers and processes, etc. We're trying to restructure that to better deliver local schemes, to restore something of the road safety projects that we had in the past, which were lost quite rightly because there simply wasn't any money. There wasn't any money in 2016. Now, the net proceeds of CAS offer us opportunities to do things differently in a better way. But it is going to take a few months to restructure, to bring in new people, and to start to deliver what I know all councillors want, because I want that as well. And yes, mitigations where necessary for CAS can be included, but my first priority has always been the commitments that we have made to communities regarding local silk schemes.
Thank you. Before I go back to you, I just want to reassure Councillor Bradshaw that yes, Lucknow Road is on the list. Councillor Fodor.
Yeah. Well, I was waiting to hear about the bullet point that says there will be 10 million new funding to enable local and neighbourhood schemes. So I'd just like to know, like I said, how might that be made available? If that's additional extra funding and it's from the CAS proceeds, how will it be apportioned? So will we know that there can be an extra bid, certainly in the absence in my area of any funds for a bid? But we have problems, we have rat runs.
Yeah, we will certainly have to add in several £1 million to compensate for the inflation caused by disastrous central government.
So does that mean no new schemes despite the...
No, I think there will be enough to do more than that. But we still only have a delivery mechanism. If you gave me £10 million now, you would have nothing extra tomorrow, because it takes several months to build up an organisation and to change your processes in order to be able to deliver more widely and at greater scale. That's the reality of transport projects. So there will be more delivery, local silk projects and others, but it's going to take weeks or months, and to a certain extent the next administration will decide what format that takes.
So the 80...
Martin, hold on a second. I think, John, you wanted to come in.
Okay.
Just to supplement what Councillor Alexander was saying, really. So yes, I mean the process now is that the paper goes to Cabinet next week. So assuming that's agreed, which I don't, but if that is agreed, then that 10 million of CAS funding will be allocated in that way, Councillor. So that is above local SIL. As Councillor Alexander said, there's been some challenges in allocating that and making that deliver the projects, but that would still be available. So this is additional. This is CAS funding. At that point, which we haven't got it approved yet, we will then sit down with Councillor Alexander and do some initial thinking about how to utilise that. But we haven't done, just to be very open with you, we haven't done that well yet. And as Councillor Alexander has said, you have plans to put the structures in place to deliver more effectively. That will take a little bit of time.
But just to clarify, I'm delighted there will be plans to get things delivered that we've been waiting for. But the slide before said 81 million net proceeds expected. So could we have something ready for the new committees to look at, or the new area committees when formed, so that they know there is funding in the pipeline above SIL, because this is above the SIL.
Martin, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you a moment, because I think you're going on a slight tangent. What is in the thing is that there is going to be £81 million estimated to be available. That's going to be over a period of several years.
Of course.
So when the committee model comes into place, that whichever administration or whichever policy group is making those decisions can then decide where to allocate that funding. It's not something we can do today in this committee meeting, and it also, to a certain extent, wouldn't be right for, and Don, I'm sorry you excuse me saying this, for the current administration to make decisions on funding that won't be available until post-May.
Totally understand, but there's going to be a pipeline of funding. This is what the report's telling us. And
yes, there will be a pipeline of funding, but at the moment there's a report coming to the Cabinet, but it's not going into the level of detail which I think you're looking for at the moment. And also I think it's not going to resolve the issue you have in your ward, for instance, where there's a lack of SIL, because there's SIL is related to development taking place, and there isn't very much development in some wards.
But there is rat running caused by the clean air.
Yeah, and there's other allocations of funding we're sort of highlighting that scheme, but we will get the details on that. And what I'm going to do is move on, because we are running out of time, so I'm going to move on to Councillor Bradshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to resist the temptation to talk at length about the Luckwell Road crossing, which is another of the 7-year schemes, and I'm pleased that that's nudging along. It's progressing. As somebody who's kind of had some involvement in the transport sphere for a number of years on and off, I definitely welcome the additional funding, because it has been starved of funding due to cuts, reductions in grant, and obviously the impact of inflation and capacity pressures as well. But I am concerned, given that the CAS is a time-limited project. We've all heard that during today's presentation. You know, it is a short-term blunt policy instrument to deal with an air quality problem that, you know, we get too dependent on the funding stream, and that the substitution effect becomes greater, and we find that money from CAS is supporting bus services, is providing the funding for capital investment. You know, it gets so much into the financial bloodstream of the authority that when it stops, it causes additional problems for us. That won't be an issue for me because I'll be long gone, but it is something that I really want to flag up because it could be damaging for the city and the city region. I am concerned about the capacity to deliver. This is not just about area committees, it's more broadly that we're dependent on contractors through our different agreements that can help us to deliver or maybe not. And I think we need to look at our arrangements for delivery partners, if I use that phrase, because I think that's actually critically important. All very well having £81 million to spend, but if there's no one there to actually do the work on the ground, I think that's an additional problem. The bus service point, and I won't dwell on this in depth, you know, we all know what the issues are. The current model of providing bus services means, for me, that you spend more for fewer services because the price tag is always going to go up. And it's a broader point, I guess, for the combined authority. We need a different model for procuring bus services. We need a franchising model, which I think will give us better value for money. So again, I'm concerned about just spending more and more on an ever-reducing number of services. Last point is, I don't see rail in the list. I know rail can be expensive. There's probably some modest rail-related investment that we can do with our partners, which would improve the take-up and the number of passenger journeys, the beach line and a whole range of other local services. I'll leave it at that, but I welcome the investment. I'm just concerned about the substitution effect long-term.
So thank you, Councillor, some very fair points there. I think, I mean, on the substitution point, we're keenly aware of that. So it is not a long-term, ongoing revenue stream. So I think it's a real issue and it's something we're very mindful of. I'm not going to comment on the bus model, but I hear very much what you say about that. In terms of the rail, that's not something that's included, as you say. I mean, that is very much the responsibility of the combined authority under the current responsibilities. So that's not something that's currently, but you know, that in future other amounts could be looked at differently, but that's not been part of this thinking for this 5-year plan.
Thank you, John. So the site we're still going to have to wait for Aston Gate to reopen, I'm afraid, Mark. Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Tony. I'm sure this is a very good narrative report, but I make similar comments to the last one. It doesn't deal with the financials in the way I want to see it. We know that we have £26 million up to 30th of November. That suggests to me that up to the 31st of March, that will probably become £34 million. Now, when I see a report that's described as is talking about the spend over the next 5 years, I assume there might be some mention, but in fact the only way I can find out is by finding time in a busy day to scan through a budget paper to add up all the items that appear to mention using CAS money. That in itself is wrong. I should not have to go to another report to find out what may be being spent. And I've come up with a 10 million, a 10.3 million, a 250k and a 300k. Have I missed something? I have no idea. All I know is that comes nowhere near the 34 million. So then I have the question, has someone decided that some of that money is being rolled up to cover us for the period when the CAS income diminishes. That wouldn't be an unreasonable plan, but does anything tell me that? Does anything tell me the amount? I have to say, I find it extraordinary that I'm assuming Councillor Alexander is committed to open and transparent government. I'm assuming the Cabinet is. How this report can be being taken when it is not a financial report. It doesn't actually give any picture of the financial information. So it leaves me having to find a back of an envelope to work through and work out some figures on what is a significant sum. So I think I'm linking this with the previous discussion. We have a collection fund for the council tax account. We ought to have a collection fund for the Clean Air Zone account that actually shows us what is going on. And we should equally have a totally transparent record of how that money is supposed to be spent. I think it's really important to understand what the current administration is committing for next year and how those totals relate. What we piece together is if of 81 million, 34 million is going to arrive by the 31st of March, that tells us what is left for subsequent years. But simply trying to understand how a pot has been spent in the current year and is available to spend in the next year, it's not clear from this. And I have to say, I'd have expected more. So I am concerned that it's not there. I do not understand why we're not being open and being clear. This is a massive sum of money to come to the benefit of the authority. We owe it to the residents who are affected by poor air quality and to all those who contributed to this pot to actually be clear on how we're proposing to spend the money. And it is not clear at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Can I just add a question to that? Is it possible to produce a table which actually shows how the proposal is for spending the money for each of the 4 years there? Because I think I've got numbers for 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26 and 26, 27. I do agree with Jeff, when I was looking at it, it wasn't sure whether, and I think it was just possibly the way it was worded. It said something like 10.3 million in 2023, 24, 25, and I wasn't quite sure myself whether that was 10.3 million each year or over both years. So would it be possible to provide a table of that type for Osm?
Yes, it is. I'm very happy to have a discussion about whether it's back here or the Resources Scrutiny Commission or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Can you make that available for Lucy? John?
Yeah, no problem. Yes, Councillor Sue, very happy to do that. I mean, some of the so the primary purpose of this report is to set out what is the 5-year plan, which is a requirement under the order, which sets out how the money is being allocated to different uses. So that's its focus. Obviously, it's separate from the budget for next year, which is coming separately, isn't it? Some of the amounts involved are capable of being allocated to, and can be allocated to particular years, and that's been done, isn't it? So the CRSTS has been modelled against particular years. That may well change as it goes forward in different ways. Similarly with the transport levy, that is an annual thing. When we're looking at the local funding, I don't think we have allocated that to particular years at this stage, have we? So that will be part of developing a future plan. That is a lump sum, if you see what I mean, which has not yet been allocated to particular years. I just wanted to prepare for it. It's not all capable of being split up in that way.
I think, Chair, if I can just add, I look at the overall position and see that it's actually it's potentially a good news story in the current financial situation because it's a pot of money available to spend. So I am then baffled why we don't portray it in a positive way. I don't expect that you can allocate to set years when things are going to happen at this stage. I understand that. I would expect there to be a massive amount of estimation, but I would love to see a table that just showed me what's anticipated when, so that I can get a feel of it, because I couldn't even work out whether I needed to count a £10 million figure twice, or whether it was only in there once, and just seeing a table where I can actually identify it just helps to give me peace of mind, but actually I think it gives openness in terms of the cabinet paper. So that would be just my plea. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Steve? Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with what's been said. I can't make that add up to £81 million. Don't understand it at all. So I'm afraid it doesn't give us a 5-year plan. We just can't see where it's going. But until we get that table, I want to focus on the transport levy line, please. So can you just tell us how much will the transport levy be that goes from BCC to WECA in 24-25? How does that compare to previous years, and how much of it will be funded through CAS?
So what we're assuming at the moment is the current level of the transport levy, albeit when the contracts around supported bus services allow us to increase our contribution then. So obviously there will be discussions between the combined authority and unitary authorities about what the level of the transport levy should be, and if it changes we'll have to make an adjustment, but it's assumed to be the current level.
And what is the current level?
£10.3 million.
Okay, so we're going to spend the same £10.3 million we're spending now, which clearly isn't enough because services are all being cancelled. We're just replacing that 10.3 million with 10.3 million from CAS.
That's right for next year. So in future years, there are additional amounts assumed because I think it's right from 25-26. There's an additional amount, isn't there, to assume for additional services, because it actually takes a little while to put additional services in place, Councillor, so that's what's modelled. So there is some additional amounts from the year after next.
Okay. Well, it will take a lot longer to put services in place if we don't come up with the money for another 12 months, won't it?
I'm just explaining what we've done.
Councillor Alexander? On the general point about buses, we do pay a significant amount every year in transport levy to WECA, and as one of the unitaries that comprises WECA, we have together received a large amount of BSIP money, and that's part of our collaborative working to form WECA. It's our view that there are services which are not yet being provided, which should be provided as part of that payment. Whilst that continues, I would not advocate paying for them for a second time. I will continue saying what I've said to WECA officers and the Mayor, that there are certain expectations that we have in terms of missing services in the city.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilcox and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back on statements that Councillor Bradshaw and Councillor Gold talked about the lack of the Clean Air Zone money will end in 10 years. I don't think it will, and I'm basing that on the fact that the World Health Organization have deemed that the safe level of NO2 is 10 milligrams on an annual basis. And we're currently working on a JACU principle of 40 milligrams. So we will have to provide cleaner air for our residents. So we will be having a clean air zone of some sort to provide clean air. Chair.
Yeah, sorry, David. I was going to ask something similar to this. I think at the moment the legal obligation we have as a local authority is to meet the clean air standards for which is 40 micrograms per cubic metre, which is a legal standard agreed by the government, and I think actually it was agreed when we were still part of the European Union. The standards that have been put out by the World Health Organization, WHO, they do set a lower standard, but they are not legally binding upon the UK government. Now, what I think your point does allude to is that there may come a time that a future government, for whatever colour, may decide that 40 micrograms per cubic metre is not good enough, and then may say that we have to demonstrate that whether it's 10 or whether it's 25, which is the other measurement they use. And then we may have to look at whether we need to keep the clean air zone in order to get to those new standards. But I think at the moment the situation is all the figures are looking like we're going to meet the current standard within a very short time. If that doesn't occur, and there is changes to government legislation, then that'll be a problem for the next administration, or even the one after that, perhaps.
Indeed, that was the point I was going to make. But going back to a question, I've got that's the one, during looking at the full business cases that were made, we were expecting revenue of around 44.2 million over 10 years, and now we're expecting 81 million. Can I have some ideas about why we've grossly underestimated it in the full business case?
So that's well before my time at the council, but my understanding is that there was a degree of caution included in the estimates, because perhaps going the other way and being over-optimistic would be more difficult. But there was a model at the time. It made assumptions. There was a degree of, I suppose, statistical bias tested or sensitivity testing, and it was found at the time to be the correct assumption. What we've been able to do now is update our modelling based on actual behaviours and refine the model anyway, and that is what has produced the different outcome.
Thank you. And a question for Councillor Alexander. If we realised that we were going to bring in £81 million over 10 years, would he be keener to implement the zone?
Well, as I seem to remember, the discussion went something like, I felt it was a blunt instrument and I would have preferred that the money was spent on bus services, and you would have liked one that covered the whole city. I would still have preferred that the money was spent on bus services, because I think it would have achieved the same result and it would have been more equitable, is my personal response.
I think what I also say is we're getting into what-if territories here. We don't have a time machine, we can't go around and do what Councillor Alexander wanted to do, or what perhaps you would
We
want
are,
to do.
but I was goaded, Chair.
Sorry?
I was goaded, but I accept we are.
Okay, next on my list I have Councillor Brown and then Councillor Fodor.
Thanks, Chair. When the table was produced of the profile of anticipated spending, can we have a profile of the anticipated receipts as well? Because that would be useful. I have tried to do a little table of myself to interpret these figures, and the two observations that I would make is that it looks like cracking on for half of the money raised is going to be funding our transport levy to some extent over the next 5 years. So that's the first observation. Another observation is that £16 million of the money seems to have been committed to plug a hole in this year's budget, i.e. 23-24, before we've even seen the figures or had a chance to have any sort of scrutiny on the arrangement. Anyway, those are two observations. My question is, who determines the transport levy?
I'll try, but I might need to defer to Councillor Alexander. But my understanding it's based on a historic contributions towards buses and then the formation of the combined authorities at the level. But it's probably as far as my transport expertise goes, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's correct, and it is contentious, especially when you feel that you haven't got the value for money that you would like from it. It does cover not just bus services, it covers concessionary passes. In fact, the main component of it covers concessionary passes, which is incredibly important to residents in our city. What is left is minimal, but yes, it is a difficult thing, and also because we none of the unitaries have got any spare money. So whether we're talking about 4 or 5 years' time, that will be a decision for a future administration. But, there is no spare money. To talk about one lot of money being spent on one thing when it should be spent on another. We know that every local authority in this country is about bankruptcy and must spend money on keeping social care, adult social care, children's social care.
Thanks. The reason I asked that is because I've asked officers from both this authority and WECA that question this week and had conflicting answers. So I was wondering if further light could be shed on the matter. And just one final question, which comes back to the transport levy and the contribution, the new funding towards transport levy that you mentioned. It's not clear in the papers because it talks about this 1.59 million or something from 25-26, but it's actually the way it's worded. It's not clear so is that a new anticipated increase to the contribution from 25 and in the subsequent years? Is that right?
That's correct.
Speculative, is it not? That's not agreed.
Agreed. That's true. It's the proposal within the paper, and then that we budget for that. That's correct.
For the purposes of our budgeting, it is not what we have agreed.
Okay, I think we're straying into budget territory, and I can feel Councillor Gollop starting to send out signals to me about straying into his committee's territory. So what I'm going to do is, Martin, a very quick one, because I want to move on to the performance report, because we are already over time.
Okay, Chair. It isn't necessarily a quick thing, but I think it's something that needs to be flagged at this point, because we're looking at something very specific relating to the CAS, the income and the outcomes of the CAS, or at least the first report we've ever seen of what's happened. But that has to be in the context of the transport plan, which is identified obviously as one of the background documents. So it's virtually 4 years since the Joint Strategic Transport Plan was approved in this room by WECA in March 2020. And the year before, the Mayor actually promised a comprehensive air quality plan, not just dealing with 40 parts per million, which is the tick box that this document is having to sort of measure against, and a couple of cabinet members before Tom, the council itself prepared its Bristol transport plan so that it knew what Bristol wanted in the context of what was coming from WECA in 2020. So we need to sort of bring that together at some point and say, to what extent is this process of this clean air zone and this funding, net funding, that's now available and is coming for a few years, is it delivering what Bristol and what WECA expected to happen in the city? So there's genuinely clearer air, and also that there are long-term shifts in the modes, which is what we're supposedly committed to. Not just letting the traffic run through the city a bit cleaner, but deal with the tyres and brakes, particulates, congestion and so on. And that means putting in place better active travel and better buses, both of which are really important, and I hope they'll get funding. So are we getting towards delivering some of those long-term goals? And if it's not going to be discussed today, can we come back to it? Because that's what really matters to the people of Bristol.
Yeah, I think you're straying into doing an election speech rather than... I agree with you, it's important about this area, about this topic, but it's going into an area where we probably don't have the time to have that debate at this thing, but it is something that should be brought up and important, and I think every single councillor in this group wants to make sure that we tackle air quality and deliver all the good things that we do want to deliver. And how we do it is often where we start to fall out. What I'm going to do now is thank Alex, John and Adam in his absence, and Don. Thank you for coming along. What we'll now do is move on to the next agenda item, which I've almost forgotten the number, but it's agenda item 8.
Tony, can I just interrupt a moment? Only that I'm going to have to leave it by 6:30, and I was hoping to be able to make some comments on the Mayor's forward plan. and I'm worried that we might run out of time. And I think that those issues are so fundamental to the way the new committee system will work that I would have hoped we'd have a chance to discuss that whilst I was here.
Okay. I understand that, Councillor Gollop, but I'm also aware that we do have the Q2 performance plan. What I will say is that I think that OSM will be, I think we do need to provide a report to Cabinet about the clean air zone, and I think as part of that we should once again raise our concerns about the forward plan. I'm afraid I am going to carry on with agenda item number 8, because I think we know what the problem is. The forward plan is basically we are not getting the information, enough information in enough time for us to be able to plan ahead, and there are concerns that that information is available isn't necessarily being made available to us.
In which case, if I'm not here when we get to it, can I just ask that Stephen notes that, and I know he notes it because I know he agrees with it, but it is just so fundamentally important, and we can't leave it till May to realise we've got a problem with committees knowing what they're meant to be discussing.
Okay, noted. Nick, and just to remind members that Nick is here to give an overview for OSM. Many of the areas that he's covering, your own separate committees will go into in more detail. And to avoid Nick having to repeatedly say, I have to go away and get that information for you, I will just bring your attention to the fact that in the sheets, in the papers, for each of the thematic areas, it does give the name of the lead officer, and it may well be that you may want to contact him directly, copying Nick in with any questions you have about anything that's brought up today. Is that fair to say, Nick?
Yeah, thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. This will be relatively brief, certainly the part for myself. This is the quarter 2 performance summary. As with quarter 1, it's a short summary report. There is a table of data, a couple of pages into the performance part, which has got a couple of headline points for each of the themes. As has been the case for a while, the structure is around the themes of the Council's business plan and corporate strategy. So like the table that's on screen there, we've got a summary of the proportion of actions overall that are on target, of metrics and of city outcomes, as we call them, and then the colours there are for the 7 themes, quarter 1 and quarter 2. As you can see, it's things overall are a little bit dipped in quarter 2 compared to where they were quarter 1. And again, just to set the scene, this, not quite the same, but effectively the same report, the same data, is at Cabinet on Tuesday next week. If you wouldn't mind just scrolling that down a little bit to the next page, that's where the table, so within that table there, there's, for each of the 7 themes, there's a couple of headline bullet points. To be honest, I wasn't planning to go through those in particular, as they're there to see, and there is obviously all the data within. And the other point is, as previously in quarter 1, there is the dashboard, performance dashboard, that the link is within the report in multiple places, and then that's got all the details in for everything. So it's really just the questions.
Okay, do we have any questions? Nick, we finally cracked it.
Well, I think the idea then is to come after Chair Kaz that item, and no one had the appetite. All right, and I know we've got further discussions on the development of the plan for this year, etc., as we some of us discussed briefly on Monday, and we'll continue following EDMs with discussion in February. Hi.
Councillor Fodor.
Yeah, quickly. I mean, the encouraging thing is that what I can see doesn't have a lot of red on it, which must be reassuring for you, because it probably means there are going to be fewer. There have indeed been fewer questions. Is that because issues that have been read are addressed, or are there indeed some changes which have kind of eliminated some of those issues from your point, because there have been some changes, haven't there?
In terms of the reds, This is just looking at the summary point, what we're looking at there on these first couple of pages. So it's to be honest, relatively unusual that we've got reds coming across at the summary level for the theme. Within the detail in the dashboard, there are certainly reds, particularly in some of the performance metrics. For example, effective development organisation or internal based one has got quite a few reds in the internal performance metrics there.
And just to double check, if there's any councillors you still don't know how to use the dashboard, drop Nick a line, because what I will say is it's a bit like Pinpoint Plus. Once you get in there, sometimes it's hard to get back out again.
Yeah. And there is, within the public link as well, there is the guidance page, and within that there's the user guide that also helps to talk through in a few pages how to navigate around the dashboard.
That's how. Could I say, like, thinking ahead to the new committees, and at a very early stage, it would be really helpful to make sure they do all understand this with some actual hands-on practice, because otherwise they won't start looking properly at performance so when they need to. So I hope that can be built in.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be looking to do inductions with new councillors as soon as possible.
Yeah, you just said what? You basically said what both me and Lucy were about to say, so thank you. Thanks, Nick, and hope you enjoyed coming along for the entertainment.
Very interesting, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to try and move quite quickly through the final sessions, if I can find my agenda page. Okay, so agenda item number 9 is to note the work programme. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to raise about the work programme. Except it's still a work in progress to a certain extent, because there are some things that we're waiting to put into that. Then agenda item number 10, we've already discussed, is the Marriage Forward Plan. And Jeff, you were here in the end. So Stephen, Jeff wanted to make a point, and I think we all agree that the forward plan with us. And then item number 11 is just for information, which is the minutes from the record overview and scrutiny committee, which is chaired by Councillor Wilcox, I believe. Oh, it's Wecker. Who knows? So, is there anything that anybody wants to make comments about those minutes? I don't believe so. In that case, I think that's the last item. Thank you all very much for attending. Sorry we went slightly over, but we did have some very important things to discuss, and I suspect we'll probably continue to discuss them for some time to go. Thank you for the members of the public. We lost Suzanne, but Dan stayed to the bitter end. And thank you to the members of the press. Everybody have a safe journey home. It's very cold out there. Thank you, everyone.